And he could do no mighty work there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them, from the book of Mark. For this reason, I remind you to kindle afresh the gift of God which is in you through the laying on of my hands, from the book of Timothy. This laying on of hands is one of the oldest religious rituals mentioned in the Bible, which, according to a 2007 edition of Time magazine, has done more to shape literature, history, and culture than any book ever written. In Judaism, the laying on of hands confers a blessing or authority. In Christianity, it is used to invoke the Holy Spirit during sacraments and healing services. Jesus and his followers frequently placed their hands on those whom they intended to heal by a miraculous power. But not everyone marches to the beat of that Bible, as glorious as it may be. What if you followed the doctrine of a different kind of Bible? One where the healer is not a priest in the traditional sense, yet has the ability to see with his hands. By using these gifts from God, this healer, therapist, or in his own humble words, musculoskeletal specialist can not only tell you what is wrong with your body, he can tell you why. And the best part, he takes the mystery and confusion out of attaining optimal health and provides you with the tools to achieve it. Health, fitness, and athletics to him are a metaphor for the human spirit, a spirit that is indomitable. That mindset to me is biblical. Since the 1980s, our guest today, Phil Wharton, and his dad, Jim, have worked with and trained hundreds of Olympic medalists, world record holders, professional teams across all sports, and national teams over 6 Olympic events. And they have done so with the drive that a priest brings to his ministry and a purpose that a father brings to his ailing son. The passion for their work forged a great bond that goes beyond father and son, steadfast in their resolve to transform Phil's diagnosis of scoliosis from college into the fuel to unify their efforts to help others live a life free of pain. One other thing I will add, and I want you to heed these words. Thank you for helping me to help myself, says his clients and patients. This is a favorite message received from over 30 years of guiding those recovering from pain and helping athletes realize their dreams. If you have been knocked down, grounded by life's challenges, he extends his arm. Hands that through hours, days, and years spent on working on so many different conditions, injuries, and imbalances, people of all walks of life in so many places have felt his fingers that listen. He moves beyond protocol and is guided by the miracle of each unique human system's power to heal itself. It is an honor and it is a pleasure to welcome Phil Wharton to A Climb to the Top. Phil, what a great blessing it is to have you here.
Chuck, the honor and blessing is mine. We are both kindred spirits on this climb of this amazing mountain of life and being people of service. So I thank you for having me.
You're quite welcome. Well, when you first came into my life, Phil, I was an avid runner from the time that I was 24 years old. And I was dealing with a few injuries. And I read a book by a guy I didn't know called Wharton Stretch Book. And if I remember, the first edition was 96. Do I have
1996. That's right. Exactly. Right after the Olympics. Yes.
I was reading your book because I was struggling with an injury, but I got something else out of your book. And what I got out of your book right from the get-go, this is a love story. This is not just a book that helped me to heal. This is a book about healing, about fathers and sons. Can you explain the origin of your book and how your dad fit into what is this wonderful love story?
Yes. And it was as a young athlete who, had injury after injury, and a father looking for help for that son. And I think that uh, Jim and I had moved from Texas to West Virginia, and there was no other sports that I loved to play and do, like BMX biking and skateboarding and soccer. And it was in the mountains of West Virginia, and there was running. And my father had just gotten back to his own running, and was a former hurdler in high school, and was, so we started running these road races together. It was the beginning of the road race era in 1980. And so we had this fun thing that we did together of trying to cross the finish line before the other one and out sprint each other. And it was so fun. And so he pulled me into running as my sport. But then over time, I began to get all these different injuries caused from the repetitive stress imbalances that happen from instability, from lack of range of motion, that we things that we know now, improper shoes, fallen arches, left hand turns around tracks that we do in repetitive stress. All those things that sort of made the musculoskeletal system come loose. And my father went back as a second career after architecture and environmental planning into, got his master's in exercise physiology. And as a coach, he felt hamstrung with athletes like myself when they had injury. There was a gap in the education. There was a gap in the industry where athletes just couldn't get good help. And so this was something, tried all kinds of different alternative therapies, also traditional therapies, and nothing seemed to help after these injuries escalated into a 33-degree scoliosis. And that's sort of that's where the work, I think, was born, Chuck, because the doctors at the time at the University of Florida, and this is nothing against them, that was just standard protocol during those times, where if you had anything over 25 degrees of a scoliosis or back curvature, was a surgical solution. So the idea was to put stabilizing rods called Harrington rod surgeries to fuse the spine. There was no guarantee I would be out of pain, and there was a definitive that I would never run again, especially not at this high level. So I opted for not having the surgery. And so that's when the quest and mentors came, and my father and I came together to find help to get me back to enjoy the passion that I felt like I was meant to do as part of my path.
But I really appreciate that story, because even if we were to flash forward to 2021 and you see people getting diagnosis, the
Yes.
American medical model, which is, we love having it.
Yes,
but
we need
often
the
there
technology. Yeah.
is a pill, or there is a potion or a lotion, there is something to apply that we
Yeah.
immediately, by our conditioning, think that's the way it has to be. But here you were very much at the forefront of what became sports training. Whether you knew it or not, you were giving birth to a business that needed to come to life, but formerly had not. Why had there been or why had there not, or why did the world wait for you and your dad to say there's got to be another path? What was going on then, and can it be applied to the world today?
I think so. I think, in that time, a lot of the athletes were just do the activity.
And
right?
when was that? Let's give our listeners
So
context.
in the context of, this was the late 80s, around 1987, 1988, when my diagnosis of the scoliosis came to a head, and I had those images sitting in the head orthopedic office of the University of Florida. And so it's like, okay, during that time, it was, you do the athletics to become better at the athletics, but there wasn't really a known corrective exercise, postural realignment. Those were esoteric things that were in the therapeutic world, or we got injured, we go through a 6-week cycle of physical therapy, and then we go back and do the activity, but then we stop the corrective exercise. So it wasn't a known thread coming through like it is now, the power of regenerative processes. So we didn't know that as a process then. And now, of course, athletes have more longevity. They're way more powerful, from golf to tennis. It's not just better technology, it's actually better education to keep us healthy, to realize that, okay, we've got to keep that plumb line of the body. We've got to keep our postural alignment, because any change in posture, like if I go into kyphosis here, rounded shoulders, my pelvis has to go into a posterior rotation just to keep me upright. So all those compensatory actions cause a lot more stress on the body and lead to injury. So we didn't really realize that back then, except for in certain clinics, and it wasn't a known into the marketplace, in the practice field and athletic fields.
As I was reading the evolution of what ultimately came to become your incredible business, it seemed to me you were explorers and or scientists trying to figure out, how much are we going to get wrong before we get something right?
That's correct.
And I think this is a great lesson for the entrepreneur or anyone in search of discovering something that may potentially provoke the status quo. Help us understand what it was like to go through that process of discovery and where you ultimately came out when you said, we got it.
A lot of it came from show me. We had to go out to people and really get them on the table, show them the work, show them how their body could work, show them that it wasn't just two talented therapists that learned this from some of the older kinesiotherapists that had been doing it from the 1960s, like Dr. Shelton and Dr. Cureton and Aaron Mattis. It wasn't about the expert or the therapist. It was about how magical the body is. This idea of reciprocal innervation, of agonist muscles working, antagonist muscles relaxing, and circulatory response. The blood flow, the circulation was a miracle. We could heal all kinds of neurokinetic disease, dysfunction, and injury very, very quickly just by applying these principles. So I think for us, it was at first like, wow, why didn't we know this before? Right. And then there was almost a type of a controlled zealotry. We've got to get this work out to more people because we're seeing how it's affected so much change in a small little clinic out of an apartment in Gainesville, Florida, where I went to school.
And were you, at the time that you were in the self-discovery or the discovery, were you the guinea pig, or had there been prior guinea pigs consistent with your diagnosis?
I was obviously the guinea pig for the scoliosis. I was the first one that I knew that had that condition. And then we had other conditions coming in that were from automobile accidents, from disc compression, where the spinal cord hadn't been severed, but there was activation, and we could expand on that. Some of the conditions were where, okay, they were in a pain management segue or part of medicine. And then I said, look, this is all we can do. And we would jump in because we had more time in that period where we could work with people, not just 15-minute windows of treatment, but an hour, 2 hours, really take people through all the joint rebalancing that's needed when you're looking at musculoskeletal or neurokinetic imbalances.
Yeah, and I want to get to a quick punchline here, because I think what I find in this world, and I'm talking about the modern world now, the impatience, the instant gratification, they want everything to be instantly healed. Yet, as I was reading your books, and this is just one of many that I've read, I talked about what you ultimately came through, and I want to hold it up to our listeners. And there is a very big point here, AIS, active isolated stretching. And I think the reason I want to call this out, because we tend to think if you just lengthen your muscles and stretch like hell after you go running, you hope for the best, right? And turns out we're doing it all wrong.
Yes.
Please explain this concept, because this became, I don't want to say it's the panacea to everything, but I follow it and I feel like $1 million. What is this? And how did you discover the efficacy in order to sustain your business?
Yes. Well, the key factor is that, it's one of those things that we're taught to do something and it just becomes by rote, and we're not really diving into the mechanisms of why. We just sort of always do it this way. And well, sometimes I stretch, sometimes it feels good. Sometimes I stretch and it hurts. And then some people are like, you know what? I don't even want to mess with it at all. And so it became this necessary evil. And so you dive into it and say, okay, what's happening, we don't really want to overstretch muscle fibers because there's a reflex in the body called a myotatic stretch reflex. So that's kind of the science of it. And if we hold a stretch for over 2 seconds, 5 minutes is 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes is very typical. Some people even 10 minutes. We will overstretch those fibers, and there's nothing really happening neurologically. So the nervous system is not engaged. We're not using our right brain in that, what we would with activation activities. And that's why since about 2005, when a lot of the research really started to hit home about overstretching, about muscle fibers that were weakening at the tendinous attachments, where the joint intersections are, where they're most vulnerable, did we start to look at, okay, let's do this some type of dynamic work. So that's become more popularized now. And luckily, a lot of the young athletes are being raised with more of a dynamic sensibility. Some of them don't quite know how to get into the joint intersections a little more effectively, like you found with active isolated flexibility, but at least they're not overstretching through trying to push over that VW or push over that wall like we used to for the calf stretch, or having our leg up on a hurdle or up on a higher area like a table, and using our back muscles against a 2-joint hamstring, against the calf. So there's a tug of war going on with all those muscles and tendons and ligaments trying to force against each other. There's a better way. So we saw through my body healing, about a 2.5 year process of me achieving range of motion, which I couldn't even touch my toes before. I was a typical tight athlete. And then putting all those muscles back into balance strength wise too, and realigning, and then being able to mitigate the stresses in my sport, which every sport or every activity has stresses. Sitting being, the new smoking, even probably more load on the spine than most anything, as we've learned from the Surgeon General. But in ours, 2.5 to 5 times our body weight, Chuck, every time we land. So to mitigate the ground forces, you've got to have a strong base of where the foot is the first point of contact. That really may be the true core of the body, the true foundation. And then we go up to the extended core, which is abdominals, back, and pelvic muscles, and then upper thoracic spines. Everything has to be in alignment and has to be strong and flexible. And so those principles, in looking at the joint intersection, instead of trying to fit it into the next sexy exercise, it's really about time, intensity, duration, and working on it, just like you would do any practice, a business, investments, more of a John Bogle approach, I guess, more over time.
Yep.
What is this going to yield? And it's a lot like brushing our teeth to prevent cavities and gingivitis. We've got to do it daily because every day we have stressors. And so I think that's where we came to it, is like, wow, there's a more effective way. As I was seeing the change, my father and I wanted to share it with others. And so that was really the genesis, or the mustard seed of this coming out of this. We had no idea this would be a business or a career track. It just seemed that we were pulled into this through my problem, through my dysfunction, and through my continued passion to want to get back to running, and this being the only way that gave sustainable results.
And there's a fascinating part of this transformation that I think is a lesson to many entrepreneurs who get into the business for something that they deem highly personal.
Yeah.
So in the case of you and your dad, desperate almost to try to find a solution to cure yourself. But you just didn't launch a business. I first heard about you when I was watching the 1992 Barcelona Olympics. I didn't buy your book until after the Atlanta Olympics, when I began to realize this. But what I was fascinated, and I don't remember if it was on TV or somebody had drawn reference to the high performance athletes, what's at stake and the challenges that they face both mentally and physically and spiritually.
Yes.
How did you turn your business into such a point where you now had this notoriety, so to speak, or now the Olympic athletes who formerly took pills or did whatever they did? What was the entree into such high performance athletes? Were they bought into your concept?
At first, no. And it was, I think it was very much an alchemy, that because we were at the University of Florida, and because a lot of the athletes were training in Florida,
Right.
we first start with sprinters, and then we moved into distance runners, and that was a prime focus. And then other sport and other teams sort of more from that, and sort of started to segue from there. But I think it was because of our area, there was a great need. And there was also people in pain. That was a great need. We saw this could work on both ends of the spectrum, people in chronic pain, people also in a high level performance. And there was a lot of reciprocity where they would learn from each other, as we saw someone would be very empowered by someone who just, a great athlete that was a gold medalist. So, okay, on the table next to a woman that just had a car accident, who was told you're never going to walk again, there was like, wow, okay, my training is nowhere near as hard as that. She's got to do 5 hours a day just to take the step. And so I've got to, it puts it in perspective, and it's a context, and there's a gratitude, and start to move. So I think that it really was born out of that. Okay, there was athletes in our sphere that needed help. Some of my best friends at the University of Florida, because we were all an athletic family at UF, and I went to, as a student athlete, went to journalism school there. Athletes like Anthony Nesty, who you read the story about.
Right.
Well, Anthony was from Suriname, and he already came to campus as a gold medalist in 1988. He was undefeated from 1988 to 92. I started working with him very shortly after I learned the work. Just as I wasn't a therapist yet, I was still in my mentorship, but I was showing him, hey, look, Anthony, these are the things that helped me. And says, hey, let's put these on board. And he was always running with me, because he was an athlete that needed more training as a 100-meter butterflyer. He always wanted to do more. He was one of these athletes that just wanted to be the best, as he was in the world. And so those kinds of relationships developed, I think, from where we were in that time and what we were willing to do. It was such a passion that it took us over, and that we were working around the clock. When you're in an Olympic period, in that 4 to 8 year cycle, it just takes you over, and you're sort of 24/7, very much like some of the business people that you're engaged with, that are really taking this over, and they're Goldman traders, or they're at BlackRock, and they're immersed in serving the clients and trying to find the best way forward in building companies and these kinds of things. So I think that's the way it was. We didn't think of it as in a business context, honestly. We didn't have business backgrounds at all. And it was just, okay, we've got to get this work out to more people. And that was the impetus for us to move from Gainesville, Florida. We said, well, we could build a very robust business, but our calling, so to speak, was to reach more people. So we knew publishing was in New York. We knew we needed to get a book to bring more people into this work. And so it was really out of a need to share. That was really our momentum there.
Yeah. And given that we are just on the heels of the Olympics, we watched the Americans, the Jamaicans, and the Norwegians, and these incredibly fast runners do their 100, 200, but we also watched that marathon. My goodness. To watch them in that heat, cooking through at a 2 hour, 8 minute mile. When you started to learn about the practice of a sprinter and comparing and contrasting to a marathoner, is an ankle, and a foot, or were you learning different things about different events so that your treatment might be potentially different?
Absolutely. It's really the latter. You learn so much as you immerse yourself in the event, and the responsibilities, the biomechanics, and the stress loads. Where is the greatest stress load? So it's very architectural, to take sort of a page out of my father's book. The structural integrity, as he would be building a building and looking at, he studied with Buckminster Fuller, who built a lot with geodesic domes and foam and sort of more of a flexible, movable foundation. We needed to have that strength, but that mobility. And so you learn so much just by watching movement patterns. Dysfunctional movement shows you a lot more than even functional movement, because it's things that, okay, these are things that are coming out of plumb. These are out of alignment. And so your efficiency quotient goes way down. You need to bring that efficiency up by really changing that range of motion on a daily basis. And that's something that it's such an easy thing for the athlete to learn, or anyone to learn, this self-care. That's what we were so excited about, is, hey, it kind of worked ourselves out of a job, so to speak. Because if someone's
Well
really
done.
good, really good at this and is a learner, right? They can take a book, take a chart. We started with it with simple chart where it had the icons of the flexibility movements on a chart that we disseminated through a shoe corporation, the Mizuno, which is a Japanese shoe corporation that helped sponsor that.
Right.
And so, and just a simple tool like a rope, not to be reliant on the rope, realizing it's your body that really does the work, but the rope can help take you into the joint intersection where you can't get there. And so now it's become a huge industry, this idea of one-on-one flexibility sessions. There's all kinds of businesses around the country and around the world doing this. And it all really started from my father and I getting out there and being these first traveling musculoskeletal therapists, really.
Well, it's a fascinating evolution for those of us that get to watch these amazing athletes do what they do.
Yes.
What has come to light, and I would love your opinion on this. This was a slightly different Olympics because we had seen Naomi Osaka prior to the Olympics begin to think, there's something going on here. I don't want to play the French Open. And then Simone Biles, under the weight of enormous expectations, physically, no doubt, maybe the greatest gymnast ever. What is happening here?
I think a lot of it, honestly, Chuck, is the social media. The microscope is very difficult.
The pressure.
It's very difficult. The pressure is a lot more immediate in real time. A good case in point, when I was an athlete, it took a month for the next volume of track and field news to come out. Or, so you weren't every day now, the minute you cross the finish line, the minute you do your competition, and whatever your competition is, you're under the microscope of social media. Everybody knows exactly your result the moment you finish. And then they're all engaging with the avatar that is you on that social media screen. So a lot of your energy is going into having to justify. It's hard to just fail. There used to be, you could go to a competition, and there was a couple early competitions, right, where you're trying new things, you're getting your feet wet, you're doing this beautiful thing called failure, which is really, those are the cornerstones of success. We've got to be free to fail. So now you're under this microscope of this, and it's a very narrow window. And I think when you don't address these things, they become to implode internally. And so that's one factor. And so I'm really glad that there's more of a global conversation and more athletes are coming out and being vocal about their experience, because but also the mind is like a muscle. We have to train it. And I think that we've lost a little bit of that overall. I'm not saying those athletes specifically, but overall, we've lost that idea that, okay, well, if you continue to do the sport, you have good successes, you'll build on those successes. But we constantly need to, as Bob Litwin said when he came on your show, rewrite our stories or flip the script of our life. We have to constantly go in and do the work. And I think that hopefully all these experiences like Simone and like Naomi will bring us to that awareness that we need to work on ourselves, and we need to also use outside help, but also use the strategies to go inward and use mindfulness and visualization, because they're powerful tools for change.
Yeah, Bob certainly describes those tools in his book, but I wonder from your point of view, you are now the healer, the therapist. However, you have somebody that you're working on. What do you do when mentally something's not right? When spiritually they have the legs to propel them to a 9.9 second 100 meter, yet as the healer, what are you healing? Are you healing mind, body, spirit? Describe that.
You're working at all levels. And Chuck, it was great that you brought that in, because the key that you want to get into is what we call presence mode. So each time that I'm with somebody in the room or on video, I'm very conscious that it's not, I'm not trying to heal them. I'm trying to bring them into the awareness that is themselves. So if I'm in that place in me that's in presence mode, where I'm just reflecting that positive energy and being in that zone where I can bring them into what's true. There's a lot of things that are true. You test the body and says, oh, do you want to move that way? The body says, no. Well, let's try. And so, in the trying and the activation, oh, okay, at first I've got restrictions. Now I've got some blood flow and I've got some circulation. What does it say now? So instead of telling our bodies, you've got to do this, it's no pain, no gain. there's a different types of sophistication where you can be in a dialogue, not a monologue with the body. And so you're asking the body, hey, what do you need? So I like to be in that space and give that as a doctrine, as a lesson, but more importantly, to teach the person I'm with to do that on their own. So there's an empowerment of that, hey, you can do this for yourself. And there's a way that you can get beyond the diagnosis. We need the diagnosis because without a proper diagnosis, there can be no cure. So we need all the advantages of Western medicine, the best imaging, the best surgeons, but we also need the buildup of the base of what can we do before and after the surgery, if the surgery is needed, to rebuild ourselves. And a lot of times the surgery is not needed because we move into that super healing mode of opening up to performance fueling, organic fuel, right? What do we take in? What are our thoughts? Our thoughts become things. So what are our relationships? Who are we around? Being with positive people, being with people that I want to be with. This is a dream, being with you because we're kindred spirits, so we can transmit this. And then what are the things we're doing in terms of our training? Are we overtraining? Are we doing too much? Are we always chasing the tiger, they would say in Chinese medicine, right. Going too hard, that would affect the adrenal system, the endocrine system would be blown out. And then we're always in an injury cycle where we feel better, we rest, then we go back and we get injured again because we never get out of that cycle. So we want to break those cycles. So that's the important things that I try to bring to the table is shifting into awareness, looking through all those key elements, and making the athlete or the person in pain aware of that checklist, and then teaching them the strategies to work on it themselves, giving them the power, putting them in the driver's seat of their healthcare.
Yeah, and that's such a wonderful concept. But Phil, there's something else here. You have spent a lifetime in healing others.
Yeah.
What have you learned about yourself, and what, if any, pain has come along the way where you have either had to help yourself or you had a mentor to help you?
It's I think it's one of the most powerful processes we can ever engage in, Chuck. And I think that I invite people to restructure it and look at it as more of a message. What's happening here? What's the greater construct? If we're continually getting this knee pain, how am I moving? Am I pushing too much forward in life? If I'm constantly getting back pain, what kind of grief or sorrow am I going through? What is the greater construct? And then there's also, what can I do about these things in the moment that's pragmatic? And I think what I've learned through being in the pain myself is the power of the pause, of taking things in and not trying to move into next. I think next is a big danger. And we see a lot of people in the investment world that are moving at a very fast pace. And they say, Phil, okay, all this stuff is great. They say, but give me 3 things. And I said, okay, I understand.
You have 12 minutes.
Right. There's pacing, right? We're going to meet you where you're at. And I totally get that, because that's a gateway. It's a gateway to change. But it could be more of a, let's look at it not as a negative. The diagnosis not as a negative. The injury not as a negative. It's all just information and data. We want to look at that data and under a microscope of a pause, of a meditation, of a coming into what are we learning? Because that when we slow down, we start to learn and we take in all the blessings of our environment. It's like someone who rushes to the top of the mountain, or someone that came to visit me once in Arizona, and the person said, "You wouldn't believe this. We went to the Grand Canyon." Says, "Well, it's a hole in the ground," and I was like,
"That's it?
Okay." You need a week or 2 weeks, and you need to go down to the bottom to Phantom Ranch, and you need to take some time to see and hear and smell and be in that wonder. So I think that what I've learned is just there's so much from the slowing down, from the pausing, and actually performance is way better in that. That's the sort of the cosmic joke, or the juxtaposition, right? The great paradox is that somebody will say, "Oh, well, he's not serious," or all the great mystics were laughing and having fun because they reverted to that childlike state of being the beginner.
Right.
And
Well,
and
that's
that's
what,
what,
yeah,
yeah,
the beginner's mind, the
yeah,
Shojin,
yeah.
the expert, it
What
never
Suzuki
feels
said
that they
it.
know
Yeah,
everything. They're always asking the questions. Something else I want to explore, and then I want to change toward where we
yeah,
find you. But you described in different passages as you've written about
yeah,
I don't know if conversion is the right word. You began to learn and adopt Eastern practices, medical practices, and transcendental meditation.
yes.
How did you come to them, and do you offer them as prescriptions to the people that you help heal?
I do. I needed it for my own healing. One of my
Right.
first teachers in New York City, Peter Roth, I did a 2-year apprenticeship with him in a school that he had for healers. And he would just teach people all the different healing tools. And then from there, I was getting a lot of clients that I couldn't help through the normal physical route. And I realized, okay, there's something deeper I need to heal in myself. And that's when my meditation teacher appeared, and one of the pieces that you read, and I started working with him remotely, and he identified something in me. He says, look, Phil, I feel you're here in the room with me when we're doing work over the phone and remotely. Would you come to Sedona to work with my community here? And he was a meditator that had had 40 years already of meditation experience, teaching other meditators. And it just, all the stars aligned. I was able to move to Arizona to be with his community, and my wife and I moved out there. And it was an amazing experience of an exchange where over that next 8 years, I learned meditation and healed the things that I was needing to heal for myself, and learn those strategies. Is an ongoing process.
Right.
And then I adopted it and infused it into the physical work that I did. So my work became more powerful because I had another way to shift into that consciousness and to transmit that into through the hands. And obviously, and learning not to go so hard and to push and to blast through the tissue, but to allow the body to onboard things that it needed to in the fascial plane, because the fascia is sort of these cotton candy like structures that surround our body like armor, and it pulls thousands and thousands of pounds of pressure per square inch. And the greats like Ida Rolf and Thomas Myers, now more contemporarily, have done extensive study into fascia and realignment, and using those same principles to fuse into this beautiful work that we had from the flexibility and strength standpoint. So I felt like now for me, the work is more complete. I'm able to give people a lot more tools where they can really, really go deeper if they wish to. So it is a big part of the consulting work that I do now in the practice.
Well, I think what I found is I was reading many of your books, and I practice all the therapies and your videos and your books that you
Yeah,
published. I think when I grew up, there seemed to have been a separation of the mind goes to
yeah,
work, the
right,
body works on weekends, and you go running or whatever you do, and then the spirit you leave to your own devices. And if you're brought into Catholicism or Judaism, all good, but you're
right.
very much a product of your parents' influence until you grow up and make the choice for yourself.
That's correct.
Your books are very much promote the integration of mind, body, spirit, which is why your books, Phil, to me are so biblical, because when I was reading each of the things that you have taught me to do, I never separated my mind from those things. I very much tried to have you in my head as I watched your videos, because if I separated the mind from the body and I didn't bring my spirit, somehow I feel I was inhibiting my own healing. Is that what you go for in your practice?
Without question, Chuck. And it was interesting. I was just watching on my show, Intrinsic Drive. I
Mhm.
was just reaching out to one of my heroes, Edwin Moses, who was
Right,
a great 400-meter hurdler.
right, the
And I was
best.
I was I was remembering how much he inspired me just by watching him in 1984,
Right.
watching him lay down on the track and go into his meditation. Right before he was going in, he just went and just stilled his mind, even though the whole world is watching. They're saying, "Are you going to take that kind of time?" And that's been really powerful for me in my life, because not everybody has a natural way to do performance. I always had performance anxiety. I always needed strategies. Some
Right.
people are more naturally just go and they just love the performance. Some people, hold on too tight. And I think that some of us can train in that way. Like Bob says, training out negative thoughts, Bob Litwin would say. And this is the idea here. So I think, yes, the ability to integrate all these facets of what I call the full persona, the mind, body, spirit, and it's all coming from a higher power, whether you believe whatever you believe God to be, he or she to be. But for me, I believe that we all have purpose, and inside ourselves, we can find that true mission, that true purpose. And sometimes it does come from suffering. It does come from the fall. But it's the magic is in the getting back up, and that's the rediscovery.
And
so,
I think what I am so grateful for is, while you've taught all of us these very physical things that you do, also the importance, and maybe this goes to Edwin Moses's mindset, the power is often empty in the mind.
Yes.
And we're so busy trying to fill it, because that's how you get an A in school. So you just keep filling the mind.
Yeah.
You're teaching us, okay, that's okay. But the only way to focus on that calf recovery is to empty the mind of all the external things that are getting in the way.
Yes.
So thank you. I want to call to our watchers, if you're on YouTube. First, I want to hold up a very powerful high-tech tool. Now, notice this tool, unlike this tool that has circuitry and electronics.
That's right.
Look at the power that I use when Phil Wharton is in my head. And I ran 7 miles today. And when I came home, I was very conscious of our show. I spent about 15 minutes borrowing practices from the classic stretch book, in the event that you're really into cardio.
Yes.
But you also, I do strength training, as we do.
The strength
and
book,
then
1998. Yeah, the back book. Yeah, 2003. Yeah.
Now, I say that because, and this is where I want to end before we get your contact information, I suspect there's about 100 books inside of you. But I read the prologue to one of them, and it was personal. It was powerful. What's next, Phil? How do you continue to do this wonderful work in the service of other people?
Thank you, Chuck. And I think that's, and you read some of the new work, and we're very excited about that. A new upcoming book, hopefully in the next year or two, by the time the publishers get to it. But making it more accessible, I think, is a real goal of ours. So, doing more online courses. We're in the design phase of those right now to make it more. We have a free app. We have also a digital streaming channel right now on the website. So all those things are there, but we really want to keep pacing with the times and using technology to the advantage of bringing people back into the ultimate technology, which is the human form. So
right, sort of, the real high-tech stuff.
Right. We want to use that so they can get back. So it's okay. They always said with therapy centers, we've got to fuse the best of the high tech and the high touch. And that's what we want to teach people to do on their own. And that was always my momentum with my father. And I've continued this, is to bring it all home to you, the end user, whatever your dreams are. Let's help you to be able to realize those. And when we're a sound mind, body, and spirit, we can much better empower ourselves and others. So that's the goal, and that's what will continue to wake up and give us energy to continue that drive.
And where is the best place for our listeners and viewers to find you?
Thank you, Chuck. WhartonHealth.com on the web. Please come in, and we have a wonderful podcast that we're in the 2nd season of now, Intrinsic Drive, and that's also a neat way to find us. But you can please send us an email, info@WhartonHealth.com. We get back to everyone and welcome your comments and feedback, and also questions.
And to our listeners, you have listened to A Climb to the Top: Stories of Transformation. We are available on C-Suite Radio, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcast. Every now and then, someone comes into my life that I reach up to the heavens and I say, thank God. Now, this individual, Phil Wharton, he and I only met a couple months ago, but he has been in my life for many, many years because I have followed his practices. And how lucky and fortunate I was that he was introduced to me by a friend, a mentor, former radio show guest named Bob Litwin. This community that these gentlemen and many of the women in their circle are building are beyond anything anyone will ever teach you in school. They, whether they knew it or not, strive and set out every day to go to work in the service of someone else. And while I opened up this podcast talking about references to the Bible, I think each of us find our own Bible. And I found mine, and my wish is I hope you find yours. And if you are looking for the priest, the mentor, the healer, the spiritual advisor, think about the laying on the hands and who you can turn to. If you are in an injury or an imbalance, Phil Wharton is to me, your guiding light. And Phil, thank you so much for coming onto the show and for the wonderful work you have continued to put into the universe for so many years.
Thank you, Chuck. You are a true blessing, and I'm so grateful to be with you today, and looking so forward to being with you in person soon.
Oh, no question. Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting out of this crisis and one day coming to wherever you are. I will meet you anywhere on this planet, perhaps go for a run in the mountains of Kenya or wherever it may be. Done. But thank you very much for tuning in every week. We appreciate that. You can find me on chuckgarcia.com. Reach out. Always want to know how you were doing.
And you got to get the book. This is now on my bedside table as one of my go-tos. So I'm also grateful to Chuck and love this. So many great doctrines in here about communication and wonderful treatise on that.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm really grateful that the best thing that we have learned here, that you learned from your father, that your father learned from you, that you and I have learned from each other, we are all each other's teachers. And as long as we can continue to keep that mindset, we're going to climb to the top of any mountain. So thank you for tuning in. Good night to all of our listeners. We really appreciate you tuning in. And Phil, thank you again.
Blessings. Don't forget to stretch.